My name is Amanda Brooks, and I'm 61 years old. For 29 years, I worked at Sterling Industries, a major manufacturing company in Cleveland, Ohio. I was the senior compliance officer, the one who made sure everything ran by the book. Every regulation followed, every report accurate, every potential issue flagged before it could spiral out of control. I'd given my entire adult life to that company, believing in its mission, believing in the security it promised me after all those years of hard work. My pension was set to fully vest on Monday, just 3 days away, a milestone I'd worked toward for nearly 3 decades. It was supposed to be the reward for all the late nights, the missed family moments, the endless dedication. But on Friday afternoon, everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed for, came crashing down in a single meeting that I'll never forget. I'd never been called into a director's office on a Friday before. When I got the email from Ethan Marshall, the new operations director, asking me to come to his office at 3 p.m., my stomach twisted into knots. Something felt off, but I told myself it was nothing, just a last-minute compliance question before the weekend, maybe a quick clarification on a report I'd submitted. I'd been through countless meetings like this over the years, and I was good at my job, so I had no reason to worry. Or so I thought. I walked into Ethan's office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and sat down across from him. He leaned back in his chair, his tone casual, almost too casual, like he was trying to put me at ease. "How long have you been with us, Amanda?" he asked, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if we were just having a friendly chat. 29 years and 362 days, I replied, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. I'd always been precise with numbers. It was part of my job, part of who I was. Ethan nodded like he was impressed, but there was something in his eyes that made my heart sink. A coldness, a calculation. Then, without warning, he slid a manila folder across his polished desk. "Due to budget constraints, we're letting you go," he said, his eyes avoiding mine, his voice flat like he was reading from a script. "Effective immediately." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, the room tilting slightly as I processed what he'd just said. Budget constraints? Sterling had just posted record profits last quarter. $12 million, a number I knew because I'd reviewed the financials myself as part of my compliance duties. This wasn't about money. This was about something else, something deliberate, something planned. Ethan tapped the folder with his finger, his manicured nails catching the light. "This is your severance package," he said, his tone still detached, like he was discussing the weather. "Sign by tomorrow, or you get nothing. HR will escort you to your desk to pack up." I should have been angry, should have screamed or begged or demanded an explanation, but instead a strange calm settled over me like a shield snapping into place. I'd spent my career spotting patterns, analyzing risks, and this one was clear as day. They were trying to rob me of what I'd earned, and the timing wasn't a coincidence. It was the whole point. My pension vesting in 3 days meant I'd be secure, untouchable, and they couldn't let that happen. They thought I'd go quietly, that I'd sign their papers and disappear. They were wrong. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, my voice steady as I picked up the folder, my hands not even trembling. Ethan looked surprised, maybe expecting tears or a fight, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Not yet. I stood, smoothed my blouse, and walked out, my head high, my dignity intact. Sarah from HR was waiting outside, her expression awkward as she followed me to my desk, her eyes darting nervously around the office. I packed up the few things that mattered. A photo of my late husband Daniel, smiling at me from a beach vacation we'd taken years ago. A small figurine my son Jacob had given me when he was a kid. A little clay dog he'd made in art class. And a certificate for 25 years of service. A shiny plaque that now felt like a cruel joke. "I'm so sorry, Amanda," Sarah whispered, glancing at the security guard hovering nearby, his presence a silent threat. "This isn't right." I nodded, my voice calm even though my heart was racing. It is what it is. But inside I knew better. This wasn't just wrong, it was illegal, and I wasn't going to let it stand. I'd spent 29 years doing the right thing, and I wasn't about to stop now. The drive home felt like a dream, the familiar streets of Cleveland blurring past as the reality of what had just happened sank in. 29 years of dedication ended with a manila folder and a cardboard box. The spring rain pattered against my windshield, a soft rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest, each drop a reminder of the life I'd built and the betrayal that had just shattered it. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made for Sterling Industries, the late nights I'd spent poring over reports, the family dinners I'd missed when compliance issues came up, the vacations I'd cut short to handle emergencies that no one else seemed to care about. I'd given them my best years, believing in the promise of security, in the pension that would let me retire with dignity, maybe travel a little, spend more time with my son, Jacob, and his future family. And now, 3 days before it vested, they'd thrown me out like I was nothing, like all those years meant nothing. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table, the folder in front of me, staring at it like it was a bomb waiting to go off. My hand shook slightly as I finally opened it, the papers inside confirming my worst fears. The severance package was an insult, 2 months' salary in exchange for waiving all rights to future claims against the company, no pension, no healthcare continuation, just a check and a legal trap designed to keep me quiet. They wanted my signature by 5 p.m. tomorrow, counting on me to be too scared or desperate to fight back, to just take the money and disappear. But I wasn't scared and I wasn't desperate. I'd spent 29 years as a compliance officer, and I knew this wasn't standard practice. This was a targeted move to silence me, and I knew exactly why. For the past 5 years, I'd been documenting financial irregularities at Sterling. Discrepancies in revenue reports, backdated quality certifications, suspicious loan applications that didn't add up. I'd sent memos to leadership, flagged issues, presented evidence in meetings, but every time I'd been ignored or told to focus on other priorities, as if integrity was an inconvenience. Ethan had only been with the company for 8 months, but the problems had gotten worse under his watch. He'd come in with a reputation for efficiency, which I quickly learned meant cutting corners at any cost, even if it meant breaking the law. I clashed with him just 2 weeks ago when I refused to sign off on a cost-cutting initiative that violated several regulations, safety standards, labor laws, you name it. He'd brushed me off, his jaw tight, but I'd seen the look in his eyes, anger, maybe even fear. Now I understood why. He needed me gone before I could escalate my concerns, before my pension vested and I became untouchable, a liability he couldn't control. This wasn't about budget constraints, it was about protecting whatever he was hiding, and I had a feeling I knew exactly what that was. I'd seen the patterns, the numbers that didn't add up, the emails that hinted at something much bigger than a few bad decisions. I walked to my home office, a small room at the back of my house filled with memories of better days, photos of Daniel and Jacob on the walls, a quilt my mother had made draped over the chair. I pulled a fireproof lockbox from the shelf, my hands steady now, and unlocked it with the key I kept hidden in a drawer. Inside were years of documents I'd brought home, copies of troubling financial reports, emails instructing staff to manipulate data, notes from meetings where my concerns were dismissed with a wave of a hand. I'd kept them not because I planned to use them, but because my instincts told me something was wrong, and I'd learned long ago to trust those instincts. As I sifted through the papers, the pattern became even clearer. Systematic fraud, stretching back years but accelerating under Ethan's leadership. I'd reported everything through proper channels, but they'd buried it, hoping I'd give up. Now they thought they could bury me too. But they were wrong. I reached for my phone, scrolling to a name I hadn't called in years. Michael Carter, a former colleague who now worked for the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was time to make a move they'd never see coming, a move that would change everything. That evening, I sat in my living room, the lockbox open on the coffee table, papers spread out around me like a map of betrayal. The rain had stopped, leaving the house quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a reminder of the ticking clock on my severance deadline. I held my phone, my thumb hovering over Michael Carter's name, my heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. Michael had been Sterling's financial controller a decade ago, a man who'd always respected my attention to detail, even when others found it annoying, rolling their eyes at my insistence on double-checking every figure. When he left to join the SEC, he told me, "If you ever need me, Amanda, you know where to find me." I hadn't thought I'd ever need to make this call, but here I was, 29 years of loyalty thrown away, my pension stolen, and a mountain of evidence that could bring Sterling to its knees. I pressed the call button, my heart pounding as it rang, each tone stretching into eternity. Michael picked up on the third ring, his voice warm but surprised, a hint of concern in his tone. "Amanda? It's been a while. How are you?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Not great, Michael," I said. "I was fired today, 3 days before my pension vested. And I think you'll want to hear why." There was a pause, then his tone shifted, serious now, all business. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, I laid it all out. The termination, the suspicious timing, the years of financial irregularities I'd documented, the memos I'd sent that were ignored, the recent clash with Ethan over his shady cost-cutting plan that broke every rule in the book. I told him about the evidence in my lockbox, the patterns of fraud I'd uncovered, the way Sterling had been manipulating its numbers to inflate its value for investors, all while pretending everything was fine. Michael listened quietly, asking pointed questions here and there, his voice calm but focused, like he was already piecing together the puzzle. When I finished, he let out a low whistle, the sound carrying a mix of shock and admiration. "Amanda, this isn't just wrongful termination," he said. "If what you're describing is accurate, Sterling could be looking at serious securities violations. The timing with your pension makes it even more damning. It suggests they were trying to silence a whistleblower before you could do any real damage." He explained the SEC's whistleblower protections, how I could file a formal report, and how they'd investigate, his words giving me a glimmer of hope in the darkness. "Don't sign that severance agreement," he warned, his tone firm. "And secure those documents somewhere safe. I'll arrange for you to meet with my team on Monday morning." I thanked him, a weight lifting off my shoulders, the first real relief I'd felt since Ethan's office. For the first time, I felt like I had a path forward, a way to fight back, to reclaim what was mine. The rest of the night I prepared, my hands steady as I made copies of every document, organizing them into 3 sets, one for the SEC, one for my records, and one as a backup just in case. I worked until midnight, my kitchen table covered in papers, my mind racing but focused, the storm of emotions inside me channeled into action. My phone buzzed several times, calls from Sarah in HR, even one from Ethan himself, his voice tense, almost pleading. "Amanda, we need that paperwork signed tonight," he said in a voicemail. "I can come by if that helps." I ignored them all, their desperation only confirming what I already knew. They were scared, and they should be. I wasn't going to sign their agreement, wasn't going to let them silence me. I'd spent 29 years doing the right thing, and now I was going to make sure the truth came out, no matter what it cost them. Saturday morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years, a fire burning inside me that I hadn't known I still had. I dressed in a sharp gray suit, the one I saved for important meetings, the one that made me feel like I could take on the world. I sat down at my kitchen table to finish organizing my evidence, the documents spread out like a battlefield, each one a weapon in the fight I was about to wage. Papers told a clear story. Falsified revenue reports, backdated certifications, emails instructing staff to adjust numbers to meet investor expectations, all of it pointing to a pattern of fraud that had been going on for years, getting worse under Ethan's watch. I created a detailed index, making sure everything was in order for my meeting with the SEC on Monday, my hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. The work kept me focused, kept the anger and hurt at bay, but I knew the fight was just beginning and I had to be ready for anything. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, each call a reminder of the pressure they were trying to put on me. Sarah called again, her voice shaky, almost pleading. "Amanda, please, we need that severance agreement signed by 5 p.m. today," she said, her words rushed, like she was afraid of what would happen if I didn't comply. Then the company's general counsel, Richard Hayes, left a message, his tone sharp, authoritative, meant to intimidate. "Miss Brooks, it's imperative we receive your signed agreement before the deadline. Failure to comply could jeopardize your severance entirely." Their urgency only made me more certain. They knew they were vulnerable, and they wanted my silence before I could do anything with what I knew, before I could expose the truth they'd buried for years. They thought they could scare me into submission, but they didn't know me at all. 4 p.m. my doorbell rang, the sound jarring in the quiet of my home. I peeked through the window and saw Ethan standing on my porch, his expensive suit looking out of place in my quiet, modest neighborhood, his face tight with frustration. "Amanda, I know you're in there," he called, his voice sharp, edged with desperation. "Just sign the papers and we can all move on." I didn't answer, didn't move, just watched as he paced for a moment, then left another copy of the agreement in my mailbox with a note scrawled in his handwriting. "Final chance. Sign by 9 a.m. Monday." I retrieved it after he drove off, my hands trembling not with fear but with resolve, a quiet anger burning inside me. They thought they could intimidate me, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. I'd spent 29 years standing up for what was right, and I wasn't about to stop now. That evening, my son, Jacob, called from Chicago where he worked as a software engineer, his voice filled with worry. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his tone urgent. "I heard your voice message. You sound off." I hesitated, then decided to tell him the truth, knowing he deserved to know. "I was fired yesterday," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. 3 days before my pension vested. He was silent for a moment, then exploded, his anger echoing mine. "They can't do that. That's illegal." I smiled despite myself, his outrage a comfort. "I know, sweetheart. I'm handling it." Jacob offered to fly home, but I told him to stay put, my voice firm. "I've got this," I said, and for the first time I truly believed it. After we hung up, I sat in my living room, the house dark except for the glow of a single lamp, thinking about Monday and the battle ahead. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for every employee they'd ever wronged, for the integrity I'd spent my life upholding. They'd made a mistake, and they were about to find out just how big it was. Monday morning, I drove downtown to the federal building in Cleveland, my briefcase heavy with the evidence I'd spent the weekend preparing, my heart pounding with a mix of nerves and determination. The SEC offices were stark but imposing, all glass and steel, with a quiet hum of authority in the air that made me feel both small and significant at the same time. Michael Carter met me in the lobby, his face lined with years but his handshake firm, his eyes warm with recognition. "Amanda, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances," he said, his voice carrying a mix of sympathy and resolve. "It's good to see you, Michael," I replied, managing a small smile. "Thank you for taking this seriously." He led me to a conference room where 2 investigators waited. Lydia Harper, a senior enforcement attorney with a sharp gaze, and Nathan Ellis, a forensic accountant with a quiet intensity. They greeted me with professional courtesy, their expressions serious but attentive, ready to hear my story. "Mrs. Brooks, before we begin, I need to confirm you understand the process," Lydia said, her voice calm but firm, her eyes locked on mine. "Once you share this information, an investigation becomes official. There's no turning back." I nodded, my voice steady, my resolve unshaken. "I understand." For the next 2 hours, I walked them through everything, my voice steady as I laid out the evidence I'd spent years collecting. I started with the financial irregularities I'd noticed 5 years ago, shipments that didn't match invoices, revenue reports that seemed inflated, quality certifications that were backdated after products had already shipped. I showed them the falsified reports, the emails instructing staff to manipulate data, the memos I'd sent to leadership that were ignored, and the recent clash with Ethan over his cost-cutting plan that broke every regulation in the book. I handed over my notes, my reports, every piece of evidence I'd meticulously gathered, each one a testament to the truth I'd been trying to tell for years. Nathan examined the financial documents, his brow furrowing as he traced the numbers with his finger, his expression growing more concerned with each page. "These discrepancies are significant," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "They've been overstating revenue by at least 15% for the past 3 years. That's securities fraud, plain and simple." Lydia leaned forward, her eyes sharp, her pen poised over her notepad. "And you believe your termination was tied to these reports?" I nodded, my voice firm, my conviction unshaken. "Without a doubt. Timing, 3 days before my pension vested, makes it clear. But more than that, I'd recently flagged issues with Ethan's latest initiative, a cost-cutting plan that violated multiple regulations. He needed me gone before I could escalate further, before I could become a bigger threat." Michael spoke up, his voice grave, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. "Based on what you've provided, Amanda, we'll move quickly. We'll need your formal statement, and then we'll begin our investigation, which will likely remain confidential until we determine enforcement action." I left the meeting feeling drained but resolute, my shoulders lighter despite the weight of what I'd just done. I'd taken the first step, and now the wheels of justice were turning, faster than I'd expected. As I drove home, my phone buzzed, the sound jarring in the quiet of my car. It was Sarah from HR, her voice trembling, almost frantic. "Amanda, something's happening. The board just called an emergency meeting. There are rumors about SEC investigators contacting our legal team." I wasn't surprised. The SEC must have moved fast, reaching out to Sterling's counsel right after our meeting. "I'm not surprised," I said calmly, my voice steady. "What about my pension?" Sarah hesitated, her voice uncertain. "The executive committee is reviewing your termination. Everything's on hold for now." An hour later, I got another call, this time from Charles Bennett, the chairman of the board, his voice strained, almost pleading. "Ms. Brooks, we'd like you to come to the office tomorrow to discuss matters." I kept my tone firm, unyielding. "Any discussions will need to include my attorney and possibly the SEC, I replied. There was a long silence, then he cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "I see. We'll arrange something more formal then." I hung up, a quiet determination settling over me. The fight was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. By Tuesday morning, the news had exploded, the headlines screaming across every local business outlet in Cleveland. SEC investigation launched into Sterling Industries, one read, while another declared, Sterling stock plummets amid fraud allegations. Company's stock had dropped 25% overnight, a devastating blow that sent shockwaves through the industry. Analysts who'd praised Ethan's efficiency just weeks ago now questioned the integrity of Sterling's financial reporting, their tone shifting from admiration to suspicion. I received a letter from Sterling's legal team, a formal document that rescinded my termination and placed me on administrative leave with full benefits pending an internal review, a clear attempt to mitigate the damage, to make it look like they were doing the right thing. But it was too late, far too late. I wasn't just Amanda Brooks, the overlooked compliance officer anymore. I was the whistleblower who'd exposed Sterling, and the attention was both overwhelming and uncomfortable, a spotlight I'd never wanted but couldn't avoid. I hired an attorney, Laura Mitchell, to represent me, knowing I'd need someone sharp to navigate the legal storm ahead. Laura was no nonsense, with a reputation for taking on corporate giants and winning, her confidence a steadying force in the chaos. We met at Sterling's headquarters that afternoon, the same security guard who'd escorted me out on Friday now nodding respectfully as we entered, his eyes avoiding mine. The office was tense, employees whispering in corners, their conversations stopping abruptly as we passed, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. In the boardroom, Charles Bennett waited with the company's outside counsel and 2 other board members, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and apprehension. Ethan was nowhere to be seen, his absence a silent admission of guilt. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Brooks," Charles began, his voice weary, his shoulders slumped. "We've launched an internal investigation into the concerns you've raised." Laura spoke before I could, her voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Let's be clear, Ms. Brooks raised these concerns for 5 years, documented them meticulously, and reported them through proper channels. The company ignored her, then terminated her days before her pension vested. That's not a coincidence. It's a calculated move to silence a whistleblower." Charles shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "We've rescinded her termination," he said quickly, his voice almost pleading. "She's an employee in good standing, with all benefits intact, including her pension." I spoke up, my voice steady, my gaze locked on his. "And what about Ethan Marshall? The board members who ignored my reports, who let this fraud go on for years?" Charles hesitated, his eyes darting to the counsel beside him. "We're investigating all parties involved," he said, his words hollow, unconvincing. I stayed mostly silent after that, letting Laura handle the legal back and forth while I watched their faces. Fear, regret, a newfound respect they'd never shown me before, not in 29 years. As we left, Charles made a final plea, his voice desperate. "Ms. Brooks, we hope you'll speak with the SEC about the corrective actions we're taking. Your support would help." I looked at him, my voice calm but firm, each word deliberate. "I've spent 29 years ensuring this company's compliance. I filed 52 reports on these issues, sent 18 memos, requested 10 meetings with leadership. Only 3 were granted, with no action taken. At what point did I have your support? I'll cooperate with the SEC, but I'll speak only to the facts." Laura whispered as we walked out, her voice low. "That was perfect." In the parking lot, I took a deep breath, the adrenaline fading, leaving me exhausted but clear-headed. This wasn't a victory yet, just the start of accountability. I thought about Daniel, how he'd always called my attention to detail my superpower, how he'd believed in me even when I doubted myself. I wished he could see me now, standing up to a company that had tried to break me, refusing to be silenced. The fight was far from over, but I was in it for the long haul, not just for myself, but for every employee Sterling had ever wronged. By Wednesday, the narrative shifted, and not in my favor. Finn, now suspended pending investigation, gave an interview to a local news outlet, his voice dripping with false sincerity as he claimed I'd been fired for performance issues and was retaliating out of bitterness. He painted me as a disgruntled employee, suggesting I'd fabricated the evidence to frame him, to get revenge for being passed over for promotions that I'd never even wanted. The story spread quickly, picked up by other outlets, and suddenly my integrity, the one thing I'd built my career on, the one thing I'd never compromised, was being questioned publicly. It hurt more than I expected, seeing my name dragged through the mud after 29 years of doing the right thing, of being the one person at Sterling who always played by the rules. I'd spent my life ensuring compliance, protecting the company from itself, and now they were trying to rewrite my story to save their own skins. Jacob called that evening, his voice tight with anger, his words rushing out in a torrent. "Mom, have you seen the news? They're lying about you. They're saying you were a bad employee, that you made everything up." I sighed, my voice calm despite the ache in my chest, the sting of betrayal cutting deeper than I'd thought possible. "I know, sweetheart. It's a desperate move. The evidence speaks for itself. My performance reviews have been exemplary for 29 years. They can't rewrite that history no matter how hard they try." But Ethan was trying, and so were the board members who'd enabled him, their lies a last-ditch effort to discredit me before the SEC could dig deeper. I'd expected pushback, but I hadn't expected it to feel so personal, so vicious, like a knife twisting in an old wound. Laura called shortly after, her tone firm, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. "Don't respond to any of it," she advised, her words clipped, professional. "The SEC will issue a statement tomorrow confirming your whistleblower status and the credibility of your evidence. Let the process handle this. Don't give them the reaction they're fishing for." I wasn't planning to respond, but I did have something else in mind, a piece of evidence I'd held back until now. Years ago, I'd found a set of emails between Ethan's predecessor and 2 board members, discussing ways to manage financial reports during a merger, a clear directive to manipulate data to make the company look more profitable than it was. I kept them in a safe deposit box at my bank, separate from my other evidence because they weren't directly related to the current issues. But now, with Ethan trying to discredit me, they were crucial. They showed the fraud predated him, proving my concerns weren't personal, that I'd been raising the alarm long before he ever arrived. The next morning, I drove to my bank and met with the manager, Karen Wells, who'd handled Sterling's accounts for years and had always been kind to me. "Amanda, I've been following the news," she said, her voice warm, her eyes filled with concern. "How are you holding up?" I smiled faintly, my resolve steady. "I'm okay, Karen. I just need access to my safe deposit box." Inside, I retrieved the sealed envelope, the emails inside as damning as I remembered, each one a nail in the coffin of Ethan's lies. I called Michael immediately, my voice steady. "I have something you need to see," I said. "It changes the narrative." I met him that afternoon, handing over the emails, watching as his expression darkened with each word he read. "This shows the fraud goes back at least 6 years, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "It's not just Ethan. The board was complicit long before he arrived." The new evidence accelerated the investigation, and by Friday the SEC issued a statement confirming my whistleblower status and the validity of my claims, effectively shutting down Ethan's smear campaign. Sterling's stock dropped another 10% and the pressure on the board intensified. I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that the truth was finally coming to light, that I'd protected my integrity against their lies. The following Monday, exactly 10 days after my termination, the SEC's investigation hit a tipping point, the pressure finally breaking through the board's carefully constructed facade. Michael called me from outside Sterling's headquarters, where an emergency board meeting was underway, his voice tense with a mix of excitement and urgency. "It's chaos in there," he said, the background noise of hurried footsteps and muffled voices filtering through the phone. The SEC presented preliminary findings. 3 board members resigned on the spot, their names already being scrubbed from the company website. Ethan's trying to claim he was just following orders, but no one's buying it anymore, not with the evidence we've got. By noon, Sterling issued a press release, a carefully worded statement announcing a leadership restructuring, confirming the resignations of 4 board members, including Charles Bennett, and Ethan's termination for cause. Company's stock, already battered, dropped another 15%, the scandal now a full-blown crisis that no amount of PR could contain. The next day, I met with Sterling's interim CEO, Rachel Coleman, at Laura's office, a neutral ground that felt safer than stepping back into the lion's den. Rachel, the former chief marketing officer, had always been professional if distant during my time at the company, her interactions with me limited to brief nods in the hallway. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed, her shoulders slumped as she sat across from us, a folder in her hands. "Amanda, I'll be direct," she said, her voice steady despite the strain in her expression. "The company's in crisis, and you're the reason, not because you did anything wrong, but because you did everything right and we failed to listen." She slid the folder across the table, eerily similar to the one Ethan had given me 11 days ago, but this time the contents were different, a lifeline instead of a trap. "This rescinds your termination, reinstates your employment retroactively, and confirms your full pension vesting," Rachel said, her voice steady, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. "It also includes a compensation package, 3 years' salary, full health care for life, and a formal apology from the board." I opened the folder, scanning the terms, my heart pounding but my face calm. It was more than I'd expected, a small victory after everything I'd been through, but I wasn't ready to celebrate. Not yet. And Ethan? The board members involved? I asked, my voice steady, my gaze unwavering. Rachel's expression hardened, a flicker of anger in her eyes. Criminal charges are expected. The company won't defend them, they're on their own now. She paused, then added, we're also creating a new ethics division. We'd like you to help design it as a consultant after your retirement. I closed the folder, my voice calm, my decision already made. I'll need time to consider that, I said, my tone firm. Laura nodded approvingly, her voice cutting in. Any future arrangements will require a full accounting of how Ms. Brooks' concerns were ignored for years, she said, her words a reminder of the accountability Sterling still owed me. Rachel agreed, and we left the meeting with a sense of closure, if not triumph. Sterling was trying to right its wrongs, but the damage was done. Not just to them, but to me, to the trust I'd once had in the company I'd given my life to. That evening, I sat in my living room, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the heater, the folder on the table in front of me. I thought about the past 10 days, the shock of my termination, the fear of losing everything, the resolve that had carried me through. I'd fought for what was mine, and I'd won, but the victory felt hollow. I hadn't wanted to be a whistleblower, I just wanted to do my job, to retire with the security I'd earned. But Sterling had forced my hand, and now they were facing the consequences. I wondered what Daniel would have thought of all this, how he'd always believed in my strength, my integrity. "You're unstoppable, Amanda," he'd say, his voice echoing in my memory. I hoped he was watching, proud of the fight I'd fought, the justice I'd demanded. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom in Cleveland, the air thick with tension as I watched Ethan Marshall and 2 former board members enter guilty pleas to securities fraud charges. Ethan, once so arrogant, so sure he could get away with anything, now looked small in his dark suit, his head bowed as he faced the judge, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Our eyes met briefly as he turned to leave, and I saw a flicker of recognition, not of me but of what I represented, the consequences of his actions, the price of his greed. He'd thought he could silence me, that I'd disappear quietly with a measly severance check, but I'd fought back, and now he was paying the price. The Sterling scandal had become a case study in corporate governance failures, a warning to other companies about the importance of compliance and the power of whistleblowers, a story that would be told for years to come. I declined Sterling's offer to consult on their new ethics division, choosing instead to work with regulatory agencies to improve whistleblower protections, to make sure others didn't have to fight as hard as I did for justice. I wanted to help those who found themselves in my position, to give them a voice, a path forward, a way to stand up to the systems that tried to crush them. The media attention had faded, but my story still resonated. Business journals called me the woman who exposed Sterling, a title I wore with quiet pride, a badge of honor for the battle I'd fought. Sterling itself had undergone a major overhaul, with new leadership, stricter oversight, and a commitment to transparency that I hoped would last. My pension was secure, my compensation package deposited, and I'd finally retired, not on their terms but on mine, with my head held high. Jacob came home to visit that weekend, and we sat on my porch, sipping coffee as the autumn leaves fell around us, the air crisp with the promise of change. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said, his voice soft, his eyes warm with admiration. "You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for everyone they might have hurt, for everyone who couldn't fight back." I smiled, my heart full, a warmth spreading through me at his words. "I had to," I said, my voice steady. "It wasn't just about me." I thought about the employees at Sterling, the ones who'd whispered their support as I walked out that first day, the ones who'd been afraid to speak up, who'd lived in fear of the same betrayal I'd faced. I'd fought for them too, and for the integrity I'd spent my life upholding, the principles I'd never compromised, even when it would have been easier to look the other way. I looked out at my quiet street, the life I'd built after Daniel's passing, the life I'd fought to protect, to reclaim. I wasn't the woman who'd walked into Ethan's office that Friday, scared and uncertain, wondering how I'd survive. I was Amanda Brooks, the woman who'd brought down a corrupt system, who'd reclaimed her future, who'd turned betrayal into justice. The scars of the past year were still there, the pain of Sterling's betrayal a quiet ache in my chest, but they'd made me stronger, more sure of who I was, of what I was capable of. I'd fought for what was right, and I'd won. Not just the pension, but the peace of knowing I'd done the right thing, that I'd stood up for myself and for others. I was free, and no one could take that from me, not now, not ever. It's been a year since that Friday in Ethan's office, and I'm finally at peace, a peace I didn't think I'd find after everything that happened. I'm retired now, living on my pension and the compensation Sterling paid, spending my days gardening, reading, and working with advocacy groups to support whistleblowers, to give them the tools and the courage to fight back. Sterling Industries is a different company now, new leadership, new policies, a new commitment to doing things right, or so they say. I don't work there anymore, but I hear from old colleagues sometimes, and they tell me things are better, that my fight made a difference, that the culture has shifted because of what I did. That's the real victory. Not the money, not the headlines, but the impact, the knowledge that I helped make things right, that I gave a voice to those who've been silenced for too long. I think about Ethan's words, budget constraints, and how they lit a fire in me I didn't know I had, a fire that burned through the fear and the hurt and pushed me to fight back. I think about the fear I felt that day, the anger, the resolve that carried me through the darkest moments, the moments when I wasn't sure I'd make it. I turned betrayal into justice, and I'm stronger for it, more sure of who I am, of what I'm capable of. I'm Amanda Brooks, the woman who spent 29 years at Sterling Industries, who was fired 3 days before her pension vested, and who made one phone call that changed everything, that brought down a corrupt system and reclaimed her future. I never thought I'd be a whistleblower, never thought I'd be the one to take on a corporate giant, but life has a way of surprising you, of showing you what you're made of when you least expect it. If I can do it, so can you. So I want to ask, what's your story? Have you ever been wronged, told you weren't enough, pushed aside after giving your all, after pouring your heart into something only to have it taken away? How did you fight back? How did you find your strength? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you, to connect over the battles we've fought, the victories we've won. Maybe tell me your city too, so we can share in the triumphs that have shaped us, that have made us who we are. I sat in my garden that evening, the sun setting over Cleveland, a soft breeze rustling the leaves, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. I thought about Daniel, how he'd always believed in me, how he'd called my attention to detail, my superpower, how he'd loved me through every challenge, every triumph. I thought about Jacob, his pride in me, the way he'd stood by me through it all, his unwavering support, a lifeline in the storm. I'd fought for them, for myself, for everyone who'd ever been silenced, who'd ever been told they didn't matter. This wasn't the retirement I'd imagined all those years ago, when I'd pictured quiet days and maybe a trip to Europe with Daniel by my side. But it was better because it was mine, earned through a battle I never thought I'd have to fight. I turned a moment of betrayal into a legacy of justice, and I was just getting started, just beginning to see the impact I could have, the difference I could make. Life tests us in the hardest ways, but those tests show us who we are, what we're capable of. I found my strength, my voice, my purpose, and I'll never let anyone take that away again, not after everything I've been through, everything I've overcome.